Hi, everybody. Of course, I'm not going to be here on that Wednesday that we would normally have class, but we need to keep moving forward with dairy industry, milk, and lactation. So this video is going to serve the purpose of what we would normally do during the lecture during class. So let's talk a little bit about that history of the dairy industry in the United States. And of course, our country has changed. Population types have changed. We used to be almost strictly an agriculture economy and a culture. But of course, a lot of that has changed. And so if we look backwards, like at 1850, we know that 30% of all of the cows in the United States were dairy cows. Now, we had a lot of rural people. We had more people that lived out in the country and fewer people that lived in the cities. We had different technology, different genetics within our dairy herds. So a lot of this has changed. And as we fast forward almost 100 years to think about right at the beginning of World War II, we saw that 40% of the cattle herd in the United States were dairy cows. Now, if we fast forward to today, things have really changed. Less than 10% of all the cows in the United States are dairy cows. And so what we've been able to do is increase the amount of milk that's produced by each cow. Therefore, we can reduce the total number of those cows that are needed to satisfy the demand for milk and dairy products within the United States and frankly, in the world. If we take a snapshot of the dairy industry, we know that the dairy industry today in 2025 is highly technological. They're using some of the most cutting-edge robotics, heating and cooling, microbiology techniques in the world. In fact, if you've ever toured a dairy, you will come out very, very impressed with the technology that they're using. They have to be efficient. There's not a whole lot of margin of profit in the dairy industry, so they have to be very efficient, and they're very specialized. Most dairies are very good at raising dairy cattle. They probably are very good at being farmers too, because a lot of them are going to be able to raise the feed that they're going to need to feed those dairy cows. Because of that technology and being specialized and efficient, it's heavily invested. And so in order for a dairy to function the way that we would expect a modern dairy, very, very high financial investment, and there's a lot of labor involved. Now, the labor thing has changed. It used to be that all cows had to be milked by hand. I remember my dad swore when I was a little kid we would never have a dairy cow because he had a dairy cow as a kid, and the dairy cows don't take days off, okay? And so they always are going to need milked 2 or 3 times a day, so there's always needs to be somebody there in charge of milking cows, and it goes year-round. If you are in a functional dairy, it's not like the beef industry where you calve during one time of the year. The dairy industry typically will calve and milk all year round, so they always have a product to sell. It's integrated. Typically, our dairy farms are going to be really good, as I mentioned, at growing feed. So they're going to own everything from the feed all the way up through the corn that's produced, through the dairy cows, through the facilities, through the refrigeration process. Many of the dairies actually will convert that dairy product already over to a milk product that you buy, that a consumer can buy. And we're going to talk about some of those products and methods a little bit later. If we look at dairy sizes, farms can be real small, down to about 30 head, and then a big dairy farm would be thousands, okay, upwards of 5,000 or even bigger. It used to be very common in a lot of small farms across the United States. They would have 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 dairy cows, and we've really seen that change. We've seen dairies get bigger because of that investment in technology and that investment in equipment, and so those few little farms that just had a handful of cows, those are in years past. Now, those still occur. We still have some dairies with a few head of cows, but as a whole, the trend is that dairies have gotten bigger and there are more cows. The average dairy has about 230 head. Of that 230 head, 100 of them are active in milk. So they're actively producing milk at any one day throughout the year. And 30 of those cows are dry. And we're going to talk about why we need a dry period in those cows here in a few slides. They might also have a 100 replacements. And these are going to be heifer calves that are going to be the next round of dairy cows. And so they're growing that next round. The average dairy also has about 200 to 300 acres of cropland, and they're going to grow a lot of things like alfalfa or corn silage, and those are going to be some of the main ingredients in the feeds that dairy puts forth into feeds those cows.